in an interview that aired last night, President Biden signaled he'll issue an executive order to dramatically lower the number of migrants crossing the southern border illegally. Now, reports today now say this order could be issued before the end of the month. And just as the Trump administration did, President Biden would rely on authority granted in the Immigration and Nationality Act. Will this be a good faith effort? And after 3.5 years of an open border, can the damage be reversed? Joining me now to discuss this and more, Senator Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee, who recently traveled to Eagle Pass, Texas, to see the border crisis firsthand. She serves on 4 Senate committees, including the Senate Finance Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Blackburn, welcome back to Washington Watch. Always great to have you.
Good to join you. Thank you.
So the border has been an issue that you've focused on. It's obviously becoming a vulnerability for President Biden since it's been wide open during his entire term. You were just there. Your thoughts on the president possibly taking a page from President Trump as he's talking about using executive authority?
Well, and he used that executive authority when he executed 94 executive orders in the first 100 days of his administration to further open the border and to weaken immigration law. So an open border is Joe Biden's border policy. Now, as the election is getting closer, what you're seeing is they're finally realizing that, hey, this open border is an issue, and maybe we should do something about this. And the American people are demanding that something be done about all the drugs, the crime, the human trafficking, the sex trafficking, the fact that every town's a border town, every state is a border state. And Tony, they're saying this is untenable. So the Democrats are beginning to hear this message that the American people have been shouting at them for the last few months and begging for help. But the Democrats have been so slow to come to the table.
Is this out of concern that it's becoming such an acute problem for Democrats that Congress might actually come together and pass something that would address the border crisis, so the administration wants to get ahead of it?
That's exactly right. They are desperately trying to do something before Congress does. And I think more people are becoming aware of the fact that Joe Biden, with his pen, his stroke of the pen, opened up this border. Donald Trump had it closed. Donald Trump was supporting the Border Patrol. They were building that wall. Joe Biden reverses everything in his first 100 days. Indeed, one of the very first actions he took was to stop construction on the border wall. And people are going, hey, wait a minute. You know, you don't need to pass another law. I think they figured out, Tony, that this business of him saying, well, Congress won't even pass a law and give me the authority. Well, what authority did you use then when you opened up the border? And so now they're beginning, they better do something.
Yeah. I mean, this has become a bipartisan concern all across this country. As you said, every state is a border state now. But is this not also an admission that the actions taken by the House in impeaching the Secretary of Homeland Security, I mean, this is like Exhibit A saying, yes, he didn't do his job, and so I'm trying to do by executive order what he did not do.
You're exactly right about that. And Secretary Mayorkas should be impeached. He has lied to the American people. He has lied to Congress repeatedly, saying that the border was secure. That border is not secure, and they didn't intend for it to be secure. And they have allowed 10 million illegal aliens to come into this country on Joe Biden's watch. And that does not count the number of unknowns that we don't know who they are or where they were coming from. We know that there have been over 300 terrorists that have been apprehended at that southern border. We don't know if they sent them back home. We don't know if they are here on some kind of asylum claim. We also have thousands of people from countries of interest. Last year, we had 28 100,000 Chinese that came into this country. And yes, indeed, most of these individuals from the 170 different countries that crossed our border illegally last year, most of them are single men, single young men.
So, Senator Blackburn, let me ask you this question. Hypothetical here. Let's say that the president does shut down the border, and of course we have an election coming, and hopefully the American people will not lose sight of this issue and elect a Congress and an administration that will effectively deal with the border. Is thought being put into how do we reverse the damage? I mean, as you just mentioned, all those folks that have come into this country, and many of them not simply looking for a job, but with ill intent. How do we repair the damage that's been done?
Yes, and there are some things that can be done. Item number one on day one has to be going back to building the wall. Item number two has to be looking at Obrador in Mexico and saying, these cartels are big business in your country. You better deal with them. And by the way, we're going to reinstitute Remain in Mexico. These people are not going to come here. So you go handle those cartels. The third thing that needs to be done is to deal with the criminal illegal aliens. And I have legislation that actually I wrote when I was in the House, and we haven't ever gotten it passed. We've pulled it back out. It's called the CLEAR Act, and it requires ICE to pick up criminal illegal aliens. When local law enforcement has apprehended them, then they're allowed to hold them, regardless of the crime, Tony, whether it is a fender bender or a DUI or robbery or whatever. Local law enforcement can carry them through prosecution and penalties. ICE has to deport them, and then ICE has to reimburse that local law enforcement agency for every penny they spent detaining, apprehending, detaining, prosecuting that individual. Also, it denies funds to sanctuary cities.
Yeah, there's only one problem with that, Senator. It makes too much sense. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's straightforward. It deals with the problem. I think that's a great piece of legislation.
Everybody should be for deporting criminal illegal aliens.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. Absolutely right.
Yes.
Now, before we run out of time, you've been outspoken about the challenges we face with China, and I'm 100% with you on that. Yes. I think that's one of our greatest threats. Well, on the House side today, a subcommittee on the Foreign Affairs Committee held a hearing on China's malign influence on the United Nations. Given the threat China poses to global security, what needs to happen as it pertains to China?
One of the things we need to do is put the sanctions back on China. And secondly, we need to require them to meet the quotas that they agreed to under the Trump administration, quotas for our ag products. And once the sanctions came off of them, they have not been meeting those quotas. That would go a long way in addressing the trade deficit that we have with China. Secondly, we need to make certain that we're clear-eyed about Chinese propaganda and what is happening in these Confucius Institutes, in the sister city programs, and on TikTok. TikTok is something that should be banned in the United States. There are a variety of other things that we should do. Companies should be held to account. They ought not to be doing all their manufacturing in China. That needs to be repatriated to the U.S. And companies need to be clear-eyed also that when they are manufacturing in China or doing research and development in China, they are very vulnerable to losing that intellectual property. Right. American companies ought not to engage in that.
And American consumers need to, if at all possible, make choices not to buy cheap Chinese products that are often made with slave labor. Senator, always great to see you. Thanks so much for taking time to join us today.
You got it. Take care.